Welcome to this seminar about religions and vegetarian food. The focus is on this. We have 5 guests here representing all the 5 big world religions. So before we start with the presentations, each of you will have a presentation of about 20 minutes or a little less. Before that, for the viewers, it would be interesting to know very, very shortly, if you say in 20 seconds, who each one of you are. And I begin, and which religion you will speak about. Dr. Philip Samson, hello.
My microphone was muted, sorry. Thank you, Stefan. Well, I'm a fellow at the Oxford Centre for Animal Ethics, and I specialise in ethical discourses about animals in Protestant literature. But I've also written a little about general issues of sustainability. Incidentally, if anyone wants to follow up on this, there's one of the standard texts in English is the Routledge Handbook of Religion and Animal Ethics, and that includes some discussion of some 15 different religious traditions and their relationships to animal ethics.
Good to know. And the religion, will you speak about a certain religion?
Yes, my specialism is in Protestant Christianity.
Yeah. Okay, we continue with Śraddhāpa.
Yes, hi. My name's Śraddhāpa. I'm a member of the Triratna Buddhist order, so I'll be talking about Buddhism. I'm, as well as being an ordained Buddhist, I've also studied Buddhism academically, so I'm currently a graduate student in Buddhist studies in Taiwan, although I'm originally from Scotland and lived in Norway for a long time.
Okay, and welcome Marie Mandakini Spennare.
No, Spennare. Spennare. Marie Mandakini Spennare, yes. I am from the organization Hinduism of Europe, where I am a vice president. And I am also secretary of the organization Hinduism Sweden. We are an umbrella organization and we are based in Brussels. And we are based on different nationalities.
Okay.
And I represent, of course, the Hindu religion.
Welcome. So we continue with you, Zehra Abbas.
Hello, everyone. I will be speaking about Islam. I am based out of Toronto, Canada, and I've been a vegan activist for a little while. I run 2 nonprofit organizations, one here in Toronto that I sit as a president on the board of, and another one where I'm the executive director called Umano, and our aim is to build empathy, what we call holistic empathy for humans, animals, and the environment the world over. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Paula Grossman.
Yes, I am a member of the Jewish congregation in Stockholm. I'm not a rabbi. I have a big interest in ecology and sustainability, and I'm also vegan, and I have been active in that field for a long time.
So great, welcome everyone. Is someone of you prepared to do the first speech? Have you been told in advance who will begin?
I think that's me.
Okay, and before Philip, you begin, let me just say that my name is Stefan B. Nilsson, and I'm a member of the board of Swedish Food and Environmental Information, Svensk mat och miljöinformation, and I also, like Zehra has started up a small NGO called Food and Climate, Mat och Klimat in Sweden. So I give the word to you, Dr. Philip.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Maria, for organising this event. Well, as I said just now, I'm a specialist in animal ethics and Protestant literature, Protestant Christian literature. So I'm going to be speaking mainly about animals, but I don't think this is a disadvantage for our subject because, as you'll know, the way that we treat animals is both a cause and a marker of many wider issues of sustainability that we see today. Take an example. COP26 ends this week in Scotland, and we know that between 14 and 51% of greenhouse gases is produced by the meat and dairy industries. But it's not just, that's not the only issue of sustainability connected with animals. Pollution, malnutrition of people, water scarcity are all directly linked to animal abuse. I think it's fair to say that if we were to get our relationship with animals right, many more general issues of sustainability would follow. Now, let me start with some common misconceptions about Christianity and animals. In Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, humans are given dominion over the earth, and many contemporary Christians argue that this entitles us to, as Prince Charles puts it, dominate nature rather than live in harmony with it on a sustainable basis. That's Prince Charles's view, the heir to the British throne. In particular, many claim that animals are here for us to eat. So in 1990, John Selwyn Gummer, who was then the British Minister of Agriculture and also a member of the Church of England General Synod, which is its ruling body, denounced vegetarians as, and I quote, wholly unnatural food faddists. He said, "The Bible tells us that we are masters of the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field, and we very properly eat them." Mr. Gummer is now Baron Deben and a member of the House of Lords in the British Houses of Parliament. He's chair of the UK's Committee on Climate Change and works for several conservation and sustainability organisations. So he's a major voice in British politics. And that's his view. Prince Charles agrees with Baron Deben about eating animals, but he laments rather than celebrates what he believes to be the more general implications of dominion. He says, to me, the Old Testament story, that is Genesis, has provided Western man with an overbearing and domineering attitude towards God's creation. It has contributed to a feeling that the world is somehow entirely man's to dispose of. That's Prince Charles. David Clough, the theologian, calls this the "it's all about us" view of the world. This view of dominion is very widespread within contemporary Christian community, and not surprisingly, most people outside that community believe that it's the Christian perspective on sustainability and diet. This includes drivers of public opinion from the animal ethicist Peter Singer to the English naturalist Chris Packham. But before proceeding further, we should note that the text quoted by both Lord Deben and Prince Charles continues by making clear that biblical dominion is vegan. This is hardly the overbearing and domineering attitude towards God's creation which Prince Charles alleges. Moreover, it makes eating animals wholly unnatural, the opposite of Baron Deben's erroneous opinion. It's difficult to understand how such distinguished people could make such egregious errors, but they do. The truth is that it's not all about us, and that the Dominion diet was originally vegan. If, as Baron Deben believes, the original Dominion diet is the criterion for what is natural, then plant-based diets are natural. It is the meat diet which is unnatural. Happily, there are Christians in the UK who have read Genesis and have responded to what the text actually says. These include theologians such as Professor Andrew Lindsay at Oxford University and Professor David Clough at Chester University, who have both written extensively on the subject over many decades. Moreover, the new millennium has seen the emergence of Christian organisations such as SARCs and Creature Kind, which promote the interests of animals. Encouragingly, many of those involved in these organisations are much younger than I am. These more animal-friendly views are not a modern discovery, still less a minority fad. In fact, the opposite is the case. It is the erroneous modern Christian views, such as Baron Deben's, which are the exception in historic Protestant discourse. Indeed, animal-friendly views draw from the biblical text, have influenced both dietary reform and environmentalism. And consider just three curious facts, as they run contrary to the popular misconception about Christianity. Firstly, as I've argued in the book Animal Ethics and the Nonconformist Conscience, Protestant Christians drove animal welfare in England for nearly 300 years. From the 17th century legislation preventing attaching a plough to an animal's tail, through the banning of blood sports and protecting domestic animals, to the founding of the RSPCA and the anti-vivisection movement in the earlier 20th century, in the 19th century, Protestant Christians were in the vanguard. Secondly, recent research has shown that these same kinds of Christians were instrumental in driving US environmentalism in the earlier 20th century. And thirdly, the historian Keith Thomas has shown a link between the Protestant teaching on providence and the harmony in creation, which we would now call ecology. In each case, the prime movers were not just Protestants, but a specific group of Protestant Christians, those I call nonconformist. They had in common a rejection of church tradition and a return to the biblical texts as authoritative. And in what follows, I shall use examples from these nonconformist Christians to illustrate that what I'm saying is not simply speaking with the benefit of hindsight. It's important to understand that the biblical creation narrative not only provided for a vegan diet, it also spoke of the world as a harmonious whole, cooperatively working together for the good of all. The text has little sense of ontological hierarchy or instrumental use, such as Aristotle's view, and I quote Aristotle, that plants are created for the sake of animals and animals for the sake of man. You won't find that in Genesis. Rather, the nonconformists found a harmonious creaturely kinship of peace, concord, and mutual preservation. This is not unlike modern ideas of an ecosystem. Musical tropes, musical images predominate. So in 1538, Martin Luther wrote of the harmony not only among men, but also between the dumb animals and men. And in 1641, George Walker said that originally all creatures lived together in love and concord among themselves. For John Calvin in the mid-16th century, this precluded predation and violence. He says there would certainly have been no discord among the creatures of God if they had remained in their first and original condition. Now, I emphasize that I'm not reading back into the biblical text modern ecological understandings. Rather, as Keith Thomas has argued, modern understandings drew on these earlier insights. But Christians who want to eat animals commonly respond by saying that this was true only before the fall. After that, they say, God gave us animals to eat. But this also is incorrect. The fall, by the way, is the name given to that event in the Christian narrative which tells of humans turning away from God in an original act of overconsumption and towards their own anthropocentric interests. The biblical text refers to a new disharmony in creation, which introduced scarcity after the fall, but the diet remained vegan. Christians who are determined to find warrant for eating animals next turn to the flood narrative, which tells of a universal deluge which destroyed all agriculture. Incidentally, we should note that all species were preserved through the flood regardless of their usefulness or harmfulness to humans. The cause of the flood was the spread of a great violence throughout all creation, an extension of the disharmony produced by the anthropocentric exploitation of Eden. From Philip Henry in the mid-17th century to John Gill in the mid-18th, nonconformists spoke of riotous flesh-eaters before the flood, even of cannibalism. But this flesh-eating was roundly condemned and was the consequence of sin. Since human beings were determined to eat animals, the Noahic covenant, the covenant made with Noah after the flood, set out to regulate this and restrict cruelty. Now, here I can only mention the requirement that an animal be drained of blood before it's cooked and eaten. This was a simple way to ensure that it was dead. As Albert Barnes observed in the mid-19th century, exsanguination, the draining of the blood, not only prevents the consumption of living flesh, it will also prevent the horrid cruelty, he says, of mutilating or cooking an animal while yet alive and capable of suffering pain. The draining of the blood from the body is an obvious occasion of death, and therefore the prohibition to eat the flesh of with the blood of life is a necessary restraint from savage cruelty. At this point, Christians who desire to eat meat say triumphantly, "There you are, we have permission to eat animals." But this neglects both the reason for that permission and the restrictions on cruelty which it imposed. First, the permission to eat animals was the result of sin, which had so corrupted our appetite that we unnaturally desire to eat flesh. An unnatural, corrupted appetite is something over which we should mourn, not rejoice. Secondly, permission was given because anthropocentric sin had so destroyed nature's harmony that food scarcity reduced human agriculture to subsistence farming. This made eating animal flesh necessary for survival. We no longer need to subsistence farm in the West, so the agricultural basis for meat eating has gone. Thirdly, as I've mentioned, it's not permitted to eat animals before they are dead. Now, we know that animals in industrial facilities are often butchered before they're dead, either as a result of mechanical failure, boredom, or sadism. The exsanguination rules of the Noahic covenant would close down industrial meat production overnight. In 1641, George Walker condemned cruelty to animals as a kind of scorn and contempt for the workmanship of God our Creator, and for the works of his hand which made us, and an injury which reflects on God's majesty. And we hereby give just occasion to God, and as it were, invite and provoke him to judge us by our own mouth, and to proceed against us according to the example of our own doings, and to mete out to us by the same measure as we have done to his creatures, the living works of his hands. Next, we come to the law given through Moses, and I can only briefly touch on this, but it extends the anti-cruelty provision of the Noahic covenant. Firstly, the Mosaic Law distinguished between animals that can be eaten in conditions of scarcity and animals which must not be eaten or harmed even in conditions of scarcity. It sets out a few simple rules to ensure that animals that can only be killed with great cruelty are not eaten. For example, crustacea, commonly boiled to death in the modern world, are protected. So are cephalopods with their distributed nervous system, which nowadays are often dismembered or grilled alive. Similarly, pigs, whose neck arteries are hidden deeply in fat and muscle and are therefore hard to slaughter, are forbidden as food. Secondly, with very few exceptions, all slaughter was religious rather than secular. As a result, slaughter had to be overseen by a priest who refused permission to kill an animal if it were injured or bore any mark of injury. This meant that subsistence farmers had to be very careful to prevent their animals from suffering accidental injuries. It also meant that deliberate mutilations, such as are common in the developed West, were prevented. A farmer could not castrate, tail dock, debeak, dehorn, or brand his animals. Finally, and very briefly, I want to turn to the texts of the New Testament, and I can only just sketch this. Firstly, we should note that Jesus affirms the integrity of the Older Testament texts, including the law. This would include the observations I've made about the Noahic and Mosaic covenants. Secondly, animals are present or significantly absent at each stage of Jesus' ministry. Oxen at his birth, a dove at his baptism, wild animals at his temptation, a donkey and a foal at his entry into Jerusalem, and an absent lamb at the Last Supper. The absence of the lamb is significant, of course, because Jesus' institution of the Eucharist, the Christian celebration, was plant-based. John's Gospel suggests that Jesus routinely celebrated Passover without the lamb. Thirdly, Jesus referred positively to animals in his teaching. For example, he affirmed that God cares for sparrows individually, not just collectively, and he rebuked those who count birds of little worth. He often referred to himself as the good shepherd who cares for the sheep rather than the wicked shepherd who eats them. There are many other examples in the Gospels. Fourthly, there is no record that Jesus ate animals. The single clear reference to his eating a piece of fish was after his resurrection. This was not, however, for dietary purposes, but to demonstrate that he was not a ghost. It seems unlikely that any of us will be called upon to prove that we are not a ghost. Finally, after his resurrection, he showed the Apostle John a vision of 4 living creatures worshipping around the throne of God: a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle, each the head of the fourfold classification of animals in the 1st century. In doing so, he affirmed the Old Testament theme that all creation, without hierarchy, was created to praise God. Well, in the time allotted, I'll have to bring it to an end there, but I look forward to questions and discussion. So it's back to you, Stefan.
Thank you so much, Philip. And we don't have any questions as yet from the viewers. The idea is to collect it afterwards, but of course, if there is a question, I will bring it up immediately. Maybe one of you other 4 people in the panel has some kind of a reflection or question. Not yet. Yes. Come on, Paula. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just thinking when Dr. Philip Samson talked that I can cut half of my speech, but it's all the Abrahamic religions are connected with the Bible. So it's interesting to notice the similarities. I'm just wondering, I have not heard before about Jesus being a vegetarian, or this is completely new to me.
Okay. Yeah, there are, of course, very many things in common between the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition because we share so many of the scriptures. I'm not sure that I would refer to Jesus as either vegetarian or vegan because, of course, these are modern terms. Vegetarian from the mid-19th century and vegan from the 1940s. But it's simply the case that there is no record of Jesus ever eating meat in the New Testament. The only record of his eating a piece of fish, a piece of dried fish, was after the resurrection when people were frightened to see him because he died and now they could see him. So to prove he wasn't a ghost, he asked for something to eat and they gave him a piece of dried fish, which he ate. But that had nothing to do with diet. It was to prove that he wasn't a ghost. And since I think it's unlikely that any of us will be called upon to prove that we're not ghosts, I think that perhaps is not the most relevant illustration from the life of Jesus.
Okay, Zehra, you had some reflection, I think.
Interestingly, I was going to say both of the things that Paula said. The similarities really blew me away. And this is also the first time I heard that there's no record of Jesus having eaten meat. And that's really quite a phenomenal thing to learn. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay, thank you. And we will continue now with Zehra for your presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. I'm going to see how we can shrink these Zoom windows a little bit. There we go. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am deeply honored to have this opportunity to speak with you and share some thoughts about the tremendous cognitive dissidence in Islamic values, the beautiful values that I was taught as a kid, and their disconnect with my past consumption habits and currently the general Muslim population's consumption habits, particularly when it comes to consuming animals. I'm sure we can all agree that our mindless consumption is causing unspeakable suffering to animals, our environment, and the most marginalized people on our planet. I find it hardest, and this may just be my personal experience, but I find it very difficult to reach my fellow Muslims with the vegan message. And that's because we are mostly convinced that eating animals is not only approved, but part and parcel of the Islamic religion. This label provides the illusion of divine permission. And I will make a case for the main arguments that this is not in fact the case. And in my opinion, veganism is most aligned with Islamic values. Now, we all know the data. Dr. Philip went over it as well. We know that we have raised so much land, we've destroyed so much habitat, that it equals the size of the entire continent of Africa. So we can feed the cow that we eat instead of feeding hungry children. We know that UN reports on climate change repeatedly encourage people to stop eating meat and dairy, but then they serve animals at their conferences. We know that 75% of diseases are zoonotic, and despite all these facts, despite us watching the world burn and flood, we still carry on. The halal certification, which makes wealthy people extremely, extremely wealthy, is not grounded in Islamic values. It is grounded in capitalism. Like so many evils in our world, it comes down to money and power. The Quran tells us not to cause corruption and destruction and ruin on earth. However, meat and dairy factory farming is the leading cause of habitat destruction, water depletion, deforestation, species extinction, and ocean dead zones. This is a direct quote from the Quran. And do good as Allah has been good to you, and do not seek to cause destruction on the earth. Allah does not love the corruptors. Here's another one. And it is he who has made you successors upon the earth and has raised some of you above others in degrees, that he may try you through what he has given you. Indeed, your Lord is swift in penalty, but indeed he is forgiving and merciful. Our consumption habits are killing the earth. Our actions do not align with the instructions in the Quran that tell us to be mindful and compassionate. It is true that it says in the Quran that it is permissible to eat animals. However, it is never advised that we eat animals. 1400 years ago, living in a food desert, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, barely ate animals. It is a popular belief that he was mostly vegetarian and ate only when hungry, fasting often. There were no grocery stores, no import-export the way we have today. Without eating animals in the desert, there would be certain death. Here's another quote from the Quran. Indeed, we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, and they declined to bear it and feared it. But man undertook to bear it. Indeed, he was unjust and ignorant. Corruption doth appear on land and sea because of the evil which men's hands have done, that he may make them taste a part of that which they have done, in order that they may return. There weren't enough humans on the planet 1400 years ago to have drummed up the destruction we have currently. It is theorized that people would cut off parts of live animals. So Quranic instruction, similar to the concept of kosher, is the concept of halal. It regulated the method of slaughter to a more humane one. Islam also regulated slavery and limited marrying multiple wives to 4. Weird things were happening in society at that time, as they're still happening today. And people weren't just going to stop certain norms at that time. So many instructions in Islam gently guide to the most ethical option possible. Even though there wasn't a direct rule to outlaw slavery, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, advised on the rights of the slaves at the time and regularly sent his companions to buy slaves at the market to set them free. Similarly, men were and often married tons of women. So the Quran set a limit to 4, but only if the man could treat them each equally, which is nearly impossible. And it was a big ask for that time to limit to 4. The point is there are lessons and nuances that carry over the span of time and advancements. Most Muslims realize that having slaves is unethical and marrying multiple women is not a healthy situation in most cases. We have evolved quite a bit as a society, and we still have a long way to go, but the lessons from Islam remain relevant. Halal, the word simply means permissible. Here's what halal certification looks for today. These are rules directly taken from the website of the Halal Monitoring Committee in the UK. You'll see down here, it speaks about the following, describes some of the key criteria for halal adopted by HMC. Animal is alive and healthy prior to slaughter, mandatory recitation, swift and humane incision, compliance check during 3 or 4 main vessels are cut. That is all that is based on the halal criteria today. Halal rules actually include not tying down animals, natural feed and diet, a free life for the animal. The animals have right to medical care, Islamically speaking, and have a right to food and water until their last dying breath. They cannot be killed in front of each other. They cannot see blood, smell blood. There can't be artificial insemination, and the calf always has first right to their mother's milk before anyone can take some of their own for their own consumption. With these rules, 99.9% of the animal meat and dairy production today is rendered non-permissible. I have never seen the actual rules of how animals are supposed to be treated in Islam ever practiced in any of the Muslim countries I've lived in or visited. They have less factory farm settings, but the cruelty I have seen in the open air markets and slaughters conducted on the side of the road do not meet these rules. The animals are often watching in terror as their community members are killed in front of them. Speaking of community, it says in the Quran, there is not an animal that lives on the earth nor a being that flies on its wings, but they form communities like you. Nothing have we omitted from the book, and they shall all be gathered to their Lord in the end. It is astounding to me that our Muslim leadership is so silent on veganism, animal rights, and the environment. We are a religion full of stories that exemplify that an act of kindness to an animal can send a corrupt soul to heaven, whilst a single act of cruelty to an animal by a pious Muslim can destine them to hell. One authentic saying from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that he said, all creatures are like a family of God, and he loves the most those who are the most beneficent to his family. I asked in an online Muslim vegan group once what it was about our Islamic faith that corresponded with the vegan lifestyle for them. The organizer of this group responded, and his comment struck such a chord with me that I wanted to share it with you. And I share it often, to be frank, because it really left a mark. He said, what really struck a chord with me in all my research was that the Prophet's soft heart towards all living things, even birds, ants, and trees. He smiled at everyone. We lack this as a community, whereby we see tenderness and mercy and smiling as signs of weakness. I also saw how meticulous our faith was in terms of even hurting an animal's feelings or unnecessarily stressing them out. Scholars 1,200 years ago wrote books on how one should cut their fingernails when milking their animals as to not hurt them. They wrote extensively about how your animal's need for water comes before your ablution for prayer, or that calves have first right to their mother's milk, and we can only take some of what's left over, but not completely exhaust the mother's supply. I mean, what sort of incredible legacy and environment cultivated such sages and pioneers in animal welfare? The one of Prophet Muhammad, mercy to all the worlds, peace and blessings upon him. It is said that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, he who takes piety on a sparrow and spares its life, Allah will be merciful on him on the day of judgment. And that do not allow your boys to tie up birds in order to kill them. For I heard the messenger of Allah forbidding the tying up of animals or other creatures in order to kill them. These are both considered authentic hadith, which are the sayings of the Prophet. Many Muslims ask about Eid al-Adha, the Eid where Muslims the world over slaughter a cow or goat and share the meat with their neighbors and distribute it to the poor. In today's context, with almost 2 billion Muslims in the world, it is an extremely cruel practice, and it damages the environment significantly as well. Based on the famous story of Prophet Abraham, who was not asked to kill an animal, he was asked to sacrifice that which was dearest to him. Fast forwarding the plot twist, the ram sacrificed in this instance, representing love and obedience for Allah, serves as a tradition we carry out yearly to mark the end of Hajj. Some scholars say we're actually supposed to be sacrificing something meaningful to us personally, or spend in charity. But putting the difference of opinion aside, I'd like to discuss the original sheep. Now, I think it relatively reasonable to assume that this particular sheep, one that was previously grazing in the heavens, was not subject to cruel industrialized farming practices. His feed wasn't polluted with other animal byproducts. He wasn't pumped with growth hormones or antibiotics. He wasn't starved before his death for monetary gain. He didn't have broken limbs due to steroid-induced weight, cramped dwellings, or brutal transportation methods. He was never tied down or caged. He didn't have parts of his anatomy cut off without anesthesia. He didn't stew in his own waste day in and day out. It is relatively reasonable to assume that this ram was not shackled, beaten, tortured, or mutilated. He did not see or hear another being slaughtered. His slaughter did not contribute significantly to climate change. My point is, the slaughter of the ram by Prophet Abraham cannot be emulated today. It is not the same. The concept of ijtihad is critical thinking. And I wish that my fellow Muslims would stop asking every time they go to a restaurant, is it halal? In this sheep-like thought process, pun intended, and start asking, what is halal? How did this animal live? What did they eat? How were they treated? How are they transported? How were they slaughtered? And was it in accordance with the provisions Islam is very, very clear about? Indisputably clear, in fact. I want them to ask, do I need to eat this? Does this decision of mine harm the environment? Does it cause more harm than good? And can I do better? As Muslims, we are explicitly told not to follow tradition blindly and not to do as our forefathers have done. We are supposed to engage and think critically. We are told, do not allow your stomachs to become graveyards. Some Muslims will say they only eat grass-fed animals. The realities of rearing animals for money aside for a moment, some Omni or Carnist groups also claim that grass-fed, humanely raised local animals are better to consume than flying vegetables and fruits sent from afar, and that this approach is carbon neutral, even carbon negative, they say. However, science says otherwise. This is simply not true. It is a very fine science to shuffle the cows on the land and to not trample the grass. So therefore, most grass-fed is not environmentally friendly, as people have been tricked into believing. Another famous or popular saying that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is whoever is kind to the creatures of God is kind to himself. And it says in the Quran, and the earth he has assigned to all living creatures. Prophet Muhammad also said, fear Allah in these beasts who cannot speak. It is across the board that when we make a business out of animals, they are treated as commodities instead of the conscious beings that Islam teaches us of. This particular saying by Prophet Muhammad was said when he passed a camel that was emaciated, its back had almost reached its stomach, and that's when he said this. He also said, he who takes pity on a sparrow and spares its life, Allah will be merciful on him on the day of judgment. And a man asked him, O Messenger of God, would we be rewarded for being compassionate towards animals? Our beloved Prophet replied, for every living thing, there is a reward. Even though the Quran directs us to eat halal and tayyib, which means pure, our halal meat is often not. Hormones and antibiotics are injected into the animals to prevent disease in their confined quarters. We consume these by extension. Inept and cruel living standards, chemical interference, mysterious animal feed. These conditions do not translate into a natural life where animals can roam and eat purely as they please. Often animal feed used in factory farming, as we know, contains animal byproduct. This is also in direct conflict with halal tenets. Haram means it is prohibited for Muslims. In fact, if we don't know that an animal that is slaughtered has ever encountered that which is haram, which is not permissible, we are supposed to err on the side of caution and not engage. Unless we know for sure that all the rules of halal have been followed, we cannot consume that animal product. As Muslims, we have been called upon to be stewards of this earth. How can we participate in meat consumption when it is one of the most wasteful and environmentally damaging industries on our planet? The Quran describes all living things as Muslim, in that they live the way Allah created them, to live and obey Allah's laws in the natural world. Although animals don't have free will, they follow their natural God-given instincts and can be said to submit to God's will, which is the essence of Islam. One Islamic story that resonated with me the most and propelled me towards animal welfare as a child was one of Prophet Suleiman, who heard an ant's cry. He redirected an entire army for this ant. Prophet Muhammad also sent sentries to ensure a guard and her puppies wouldn't be disturbed as his army passed. I say to my fellow Muslims, remember that our beloved last prophet smiled at everyone, including animals and trees. Let's mimic that compassion. I'd like to reiterate this quote. A good deed done to an animal is like a good deed done to a human being, while an act of cruelty to an animal is as bad as cruelty to a human being. It's kind of a big deal. If you had mercy on the sheep, then Allah will have mercy on you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm happy to take a few questions if I haven't gone over my 20 minutes yet.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I must say it's been so interesting to hear your and Philip's presentations, and also struck by the similarities, of course, when you refer to basic scriptures from Christianity and Islam. I have first, I would like to ask you in the panel if you have some reflection or question to Sarah. Marie?
Huh?
You unmuted your microphone, so I thought maybe you wanted to ask something. No. Okay, I have a question from a viewer, and it's, of course, it's about halal. The transport of living animals from Europe, for example, to different parts of the world. Is there a connection with halal to that, and in what way?
The appetite under this halal label, this divine permission that's been given to almost 2 billion people on the planet today, means that there is a ton of live export of animals, and these living conditions. In fact, one of the earlier slides was from one of those live exports from Australia to Saudi Arabia, I believe. The conditions under which the animals live simply in itself do not meet the halal criteria. So it is just a simple manipulation of information that is presented to the community today. And the people that I hold liable for this today are the community leaders. They, when they give presentations at the mosque, they speak so much about the compassion of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They speak about how animal welfare is important to us, women's rights is important to us, so on and so forth. However, they do not enforce these romantic notions. They're left and regaled to the past instead of practicing those values today. Islam's been reduced to simply the rituals, praying, fasting, etc., giving in charity. The one thing Muslims do really well, in my opinion, is give to charity. It's part and parcel of our religion, but there's very little critical thought. And so therefore, a ton of charity goes to developing countries to give animals as, as charity to small communities. It's a bit of a disaster because we all know the climate change implications of that.
Very interesting. And as you showed during your speech, there's so big support in Islam to avoid eating animals.
An extraordinary amount of support to avoid eating animals at all costs. And particularly, as I mentioned, if we don't know everything about that animal's life, I don't know one person who can say that they do when they're consuming halal meat today. If they don't know everything, they simply should not be able to indulge because we have to know for a fact that all the halal rules, the rules that make it permissible, are in fact followed before we're able to eat. But the fact alone that it says in the Quran repeatedly in so many places that we must avoid causing destruction and corruption on planet Earth, it means that the environmental footprint is just, it's too great, and there's too much science that supports that we can no longer deny that it's not just about animal welfare, it's also about the environmental damage, and both is just not allowed in Islam, animal cruelty or the environmental damage.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. And now we will continue with Marie. And oh, sorry, Paula has want to say something. Welcome.
Thank you. I was just wondering, I ask you as administrators if we could change the order maybe so I can go now, because the Abrahamic religions are so similar.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe the listeners and the viewers
Yeah.
would understand better the connections, and because it has connections, relationships to both Christianity and Islam. So it's totally, it's one of a kind altogether. And maybe later you have the other religions which have not the same similarities, just to be able to reflect and associate.
Yes, of course, your three religions, Islam, Christianism, and Judaism, have so similar backgrounds, and Buddhism is like one group of religion, and Hinduism other. We'll see when it comes to Marie, but I think we should do this, if it's okay for Marie and Śraddhāpa, that we take it in this order. Marie?
Yes, it's okay, but that's why we sometimes complain, because Abrahamic religions always come first. But it's okay for today.
Okay, thank you. I agree, and moreover, Judaism was first historically. So, Paula, the word is yours.
Okay, thank you. I have not prepared a PowerPoint, but in this way, I can also relate to Dr. Sampson and to Sarah Abbas. Yes, Judaism came first of the Abrahamic religions, and the Jewish religion today still adheres to the Old Testament and to the Talmudic, that is the comments that came afterwards, and everything that is written in the Jewish religion. We still live this. And therefore, as Judaism was created in a time of the beginning of agriculture, and also when people were shepherds in this area of the world, the religion, of course, and what is written in the Bible evolves around all this. If we had been writing the Bible today, we would have thought about what is around us here. But as the Bible was written in times where you were very dependent on agriculture, as we are today too, of course, but this was the main concern. Everybody tended to animals and to the soil. And you were also close to nature. If we think about the story, for instance, of when the people left Egypt and stayed in the wilderness, they stayed there for 40 years. So there was a great impact in thought and mind in connection to nature, which is, of course, reflected in the Bible. Everything is about the nature in relationship to man, and our holidays still are holidays connected to agriculture. We celebrate Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot, and these are all concerned with harvesting and praying for rain. So we live this as Jewish people today. We still say these prayers. We thank God for what he has given us from the earth, and we pray for rain at the Tabernacle Festival that is called Sukkot in the fall. So I would say that I feel that the Jewish religion is very connected to nature. And it will be interesting afterwards in our discussion to see the transformation of this into Christianity, what was left of this originality of the connection to the earth. We also, as you may know, we have the sabbatical year. And actually this year is a sabbatical year when we allow the earth to rest. You are not allowed to grow anything. The earth should rest so you may be able to harvest afterwards. And this is, to me, a very sustainable thought. You cannot just take and take and take. You have to see to that the earth recovers and that there will be food to eat later on too. When you, Sarah, you talked about halal, and of course halal is connected to kashrut very closely. And in both our religions, in Islam and in Judaism, the practicing people, the people who practice Judaism and Islam, they are very observant of not eating other meat or foods than kosher and halal. In kosher also means right, to eat right, the right food. And you also describe, which is the origin also in kashrut, what is necessary for an animal to be slaughtered and prepared in a halal way, in a kosher way, and it's very similar. Kosher, though, in Judaism, is not only concerned with meat. It has to do with all foods. The rabbis inspect foods to be produced and prepared in a correct way. So we have the rule of not mixing meat and milk. And probably there are different thoughts about this, what it means, what is the original thought of not mixing meat with milk. But many think it is connected to compassion for the animals, that it is how do you say? Sometimes I forget my English. It's not a good feeling to know that the child or the calf is boiled in its mother's milk. That is to say that you create life. Milk is for creating life, to sustain life, and cooking meat is death. And this is abhorrent to the mind to do so. And when we now speak of compassion for animals, just in Islam and throughout the Bible and the Talmud and commentaries, there is so much written about compassion for animals. And it is understood that this was important because you are dependent on your animals in the agriculture. And also, you go back to Genesis and you understand that God's creation, everything was made in harmony, according to Genesis, that all his creations were made to be in the place and in the state that God intended. The status, it does not say that man was on top of everything. And this is also something we can discuss afterwards, the interpretations and the translations, which in the Christian translations of the Bible is stewardship. We don't know exactly what it is, but we understand that we are caretakers. We should be caretakers of the creation. God created everything in harmony and all creatures, and we are set as caretakers, and it depends on how you translate it. And therefore, we should take care of the other creatures, which include, of course, animals. In Judaism, also, hunting is not allowed. And the kosher rules are very, very strict. There is so much to be taken into account. And many rabbis interpret this or translate this into the notion that God wanted man to have difficulties to eat meat. Therefore, you had so many rules. As Dr. Sampson said, the meat eating in the Bible was only allowed after the flood. It wasn't forbidden before. It wasn't said that, you should not eat meat, but the only thing allowed was, or the only thing that is written is that everything was created, the fruits and the fruit of the trees and of the earth, every seed bearing and fruit bearing plants were given man to eat. It does not say that man was given animals to eat. So after the flood, the many interpreters, many rabbis in the comments, they say that, okay, God let man eat meat because man is weak and has lusts. So, okay, if you lust for meat, you may eat it. But it's not like your basic food. And unfortunately, also in Judaism, you can see that people eat a lot of meat. And it would be okay, maybe, if the kosher rules were kept. But also, as Sarah described, unfortunately, in the industrialized slaughtering and keeping of the animals, the kashrut laws are not kept, because if they were to be kept, you had to take into account the non-compassionate dealing and handling of the animals. This, it's called in Hebrew, Tsar Balei Chaim, is very strict. The compassion for the animal is repeated again and again throughout Talmudic texts, and also in what is called the Shulchan Aruch, which is the specification of daily life of a Jew. There are many, many examples. For instance, I must say that I was very much exposed to this through my mother, by my mother. My mother was observant, Orthodox. And we had birds at home in a cage, and fish in an aquarium. And she would also recount and tell me the story of when she was a child in Romania. She came as a refugee to Sweden after the Second World War, survivor. And there they had a farm, and they had cows and horses and a lot of cattle and so forth. And she said repeatedly, you cannot have your breakfast or your dinner before you feed the birds. The animals are first. You have to tend to your animals first. And this has stayed in me. So up till this day, an observant Jew thinks about this. Also, if you are a farmer and you have cattle or animals that work for you, and that was more before, you had to let your animal rest on the Sabbath. You rested on the Sabbath, so your animal should also rest on the Sabbath. There are other examples. For instance, if you walk on a road and you see an animal, which was common those days, that was dragging something and it had hardship to do so, you have to aid the animal. So there are many more examples of this. So actually, if the Bible was written today, if these rules were formed today, or these rabbis that wrote these commentaries and definite rules, they would never allow industrial upbringing and slaughter of animals. Also, many rabbis, former rabbis and rabbis today, say that the most ethical thing is to be vegetarian. And if you think some steps more about how milk, how a dairy is produced, they would probably say the most ethical thing, according to Judaism, is to be a vegan. Because everything that has to do with production of meat and dairy is abhorrent to someone who will adhere to the law of compassion for animals. This is completely so. What else could be said about meat eating? Well, I give you one more example. Christians and Muslims, and probably the other religions too, you have daily prayers. You pray every day, maybe a couple of times. I'm used to say prayers before I eat and before I eat certain foods. And I never learned a prayer to eat meat. Meat eating is the lowest thing you can do. The highest prayer, the first prayer you say, is the prayer to eat bread, the grain. You also pray and bless wine. You bless fruit. You bless fruit which you eat for the first time every year. You have all kinds of these blessings. But the blessing of meat, you hardly say it, and it's very, very low in grade. There is one, but it's very low. And the meaning is also very apparent. It says, you say the blessing of a soul. And that is to remind us also that animals have souls. So it's a very strong, and just as Sarah said about practicing Muslims, I would say about practicing Jews that still eat meat produced in an industrial way and dairy produced in an industrial way are not taken into consideration all the principles, the ethical moral principles to compassion for animals. When we talk about sustainability, there is also much written in the Bible that you can take to yourself, take into your heart when you see what is going on today. The first thing, of course, is that we should preserve the creation of God, because that is the good. That is the good. What we do is destruction of that good. We are wasteful. And there is also another principle, Bal Tashchit, it's called, you should not waste. And there are examples also in the Bible, quotations, for instance, that you are not allowed to cut trees. If you are in war and you come into a new land, the Bible says you are not allowed to cut fruit trees. They have to remain. There are also another commentaries by rabbis. One, for instance, says, the smallest thing you are allowed to waste is a seed of mustard. Okay, I will finish there as my time is up.
This was, I must say that these 4 presentations have really given a broad view of the 3 monotheistic religions, and I was surprised of the so strong similarities. So welcome, Śraddhāpa, and you will talk about Buddhism.
Yeah, so my name's Śraddhāpa. I'm originally from Scotland, but I lived in Norway for a long time. I've also, as well as a Buddhist, I've also been an animal rights activist for many years. So I'm also a board member of NOA for Animal Rights, which is the largest animal rights organization in Norway. And I moved from Norway to Taiwan a few years ago in order to pursue academic study of Buddhism, because there's much better opportunities for doing that in Asia than in Europe. So, I mean, listening to the other presentations, one question that's kind of emerged a bit for me is the difference between an animal welfare perspective and an animal rights perspective. Because for me, that's something that I would distinguish very clearly, and I would see those two discourses as really being in opposition to each other rather than complementary. So I was interested that the previous speakers didn't seem to talk partly in terms of animal rights, partly in terms of animal welfare. So that might be something we could come back to a little bit more in the discussion afterwards. So I want to talk a little bit about both veganism and the climate crisis. But for me, I don't want to link those two things too closely, because obviously, if we lived in a vegan world, that would have a very positive impact on the climate crisis. But when those two issues are linked very closely, it can often seem like the reason that we should go vegan is because of the climate crisis. But in fact, I think that there are very strong arguments for being vegan, and there are very strong arguments for tackling the climate crisis. And those two sets of arguments both stand on their own merits, and the fact that they reinforce each other is a bonus. So I'm going to start off by talking about veganism, and I'm going to talk about a couple of basic Buddhist principles. And like the other speakers, I'm going to deal with some of the arguments that Buddhists use to justify animal exploitation, and why I don't think they hold up. So yeah, I don't have a very detailed presentation, but I have some quotes. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about Buddhist ethics and explaining kind of the foundation for Buddhist ethics, because it's quite different to the ethical systems that I think a lot of people who are mostly familiar with the Abrahamic religions are familiar with. I think for a lot of people, when they think about ethics and religion, they think about it very much in terms of rules of a kind of more legally based system. And that kind of thinking is really absent in Buddhism. Buddhism, with one exception, which I'll come back to, doesn't really have any legalistic form of ethics. The Buddha is not an authority figure. There is no God in Buddhism. So Buddhism doesn't have any rules, and it doesn't have anyone that has the authority to hand down any rules or enforce any rules. Buddhist ethics is based on the idea of action and consequence, the idea that all actions have consequences. The Buddha and any Buddhist teacher doesn't have any authority to hand down any rules. The Buddha simply described his observance of how the process of cause and effect functions, the process of action and consequence functions. So if you read Buddhist texts which talk about ethics, when the Buddha is quoted, he doesn't say you should do this, or it's wrong to do that. What he'll say is, if you act in this way, it will benefit you. If you act in that way, it will harm you. If you want to make progress in your spiritual life, this is what you should do. But it's always a kind of conditional structure. If this is what you want, if you want to experience happiness rather than suffering, then this is how I recommend you act. But we're fundamentally responsible for our own actions and their consequences. The principle I want to talk about, because in only 20 minutes, I can only talk about a few points that are relevant within Buddhism. But one point I wanted to draw out is the idea of loving kindness, which is also expressed in the principle of non-violence. And this is fundamental to Buddhist ethics and Buddhist thinking, and to the way that Buddhists, it represents the ideal that Buddhists have for how we should interact with other living beings, humans and animals and whatever other living beings might be out there. So I want to start with a very famous quote from a Buddhist text. In the same way as a mother protects her only child with her life, one should cultivate a boundless attitude towards all living beings. One should cultivate an attitude of boundless loving kindness for the whole world, unobstructed in all directions and free from enmity and hostility. So this is the ideal that Buddhists are striving for. And it's very much a high ideal. I mean, Buddhist texts often talk in terms of a mother's love for her child, which is kind of the archetypal, the archetype of selfless love. And the ideal in Buddhism is that that's the way we should feel towards all living beings. And of course, if we, to the extent that we manage to cultivate that inner attitude, our actions will then be based on the principle of non-violence or non-harming. So this has some important practical consequences. So there are considered to be, in terms of work, there are 5 kinds of work that are explicitly advised against for Buddhist practitioners, which is trading in weapons, trading in living beings, trading in meat, trading in intoxicants, and trading in poisons. So obviously, in principle, that precludes any Buddhist from any commercial involvement in animal agriculture, whether as a farmer, a butcher, selling animal products. And then, I skipped, yes. And this, I think, is a very important quote that's often skipped over a bit by Buddhists who want to justify meat eating. But to me, this is very clear and very important. So there are 4 qualities that will cause one to end up in hell. They're killing living beings oneself, causing others to kill living beings, approving of the killing of living beings, and speaking in praise of the killing of living beings. So there's what you'll very often encounter if you talk to Buddhists who are not vegan about meat eating or the consumption of animal products. The argument they'll give is that, well, if Buddhists aren't allowed to kill animals themselves, but if somebody else, if the animal's already dead, if it's already been killed, then I'm not responsible for that if I eat the meat. But I think this principle, this expression of the principle of non-violence makes it very clear that that's not really feasible. But this attitude that, well, if I don't do it, then I'm not responsible, has led to a situation in many, majority Buddhist societies where, Buddhists themselves will not engage in the slaughter of animals, but they'll get someone else to do it. Usually in most Buddhist societies, it's a Muslim minority. And so they're allowed to do the dirty work of killing the animals that the Buddhists won't do themselves, but the Buddhists are quite happy to buy the products and not feel responsible for the consequences. So I said earlier that there aren't rules in Buddhism, but the exception is that there is a set of rules for monastic life. The Buddha founded a monastic community of monks and nuns, and there's a whole set of regulations for how members of those monastic communities should live. Those regulations mostly don't have anything to do with ethics. They're mostly kind of administrative. There are rules about, what kind of clothes to wear and how often to meet and how big your hut should be and all sorts of things. Some of them overlap with ethics. But they're not fundamentally ethical rules. They're defining what the minimum requirements are for being a member of that monastic community, and also what constitutes an offense that you have to confess. So just because something doesn't break the monastic rules doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical. It just means it's not unethical enough that you have to confess it, or that it will get you punished or chucked out of the monastic order. So this is the quote that you will very often hear Buddhists come up with when you ask them about eating meat, which is, "You should not enjoy meat which has been killed specifically for you. Anyone who does so commits an offense. Monks, I approve of fish and meat which is pure in 3 ways: not seen, not heard, and not suspected." So the meaning's a bit opaque there, but what it means is this is referring to a very particular social economic situation that the monastic community in India in the time of the Buddha 2,500 years ago existed in. It was an accepted social institution in India at that time that spiritual seekers could leave their homes, leave their jobs, basically exit society in order to be full-time spiritual practitioners. But they would be supported by people who were still, economically active and part of society. And the main way that they were supported was by begging for food. They would go literally from door to door, and those who wanted to support them would give them usually just a small amount of whatever food they were eating, some leftovers, or just a spoonful of whatever food they'd prepared. And so in that context, for monks and nuns who were begging for food, if the food that they were given as alms included meat, they were allowed to accept it on the condition that no animal had been killed specifically for them. So, if a layperson thought, oh well, there's going to be some monks and nuns coming, so I'll get some meat for them, then in that case, they weren't allowed to accept it if they knew that was the case, or if they suspected that was the case. And of course, in India at that time, that there weren't supermarkets. So if you wanted meat, generally involved killing an animal or having an animal killed. And again, another place in the Buddhist scriptures makes it clear that anyone who kills a living being for the sake of the Tathagata, that's the Buddha or one of the Buddha's disciples, brings grave negative consequences upon themselves. So, we have a situation where monks and nuns are teaching this principle of loving kindness and non-violence, and encouraging vegetarianism. And if you look historically within India, the spread of vegetarianism in India coincided with the spread of Buddhism. So these texts I've quoted from so far from the early Buddhist, the Theravada tradition. In later Buddhism, Mahayana, which was the form of Buddhism that spread to China and Tibet and the rest of East Asia, the later Mahayana scriptures are much clearer in terms of a prohibition on meat eating, or a strong discouragement of meat eating. So in this later text, it says, meat which is pure in 3 respects does not exist, therefore meat should not be eaten. It's from the Lankavatara Sutra, which is from about 600 or 700 years after the Buddha. And then, if no one ate any kind of meat, then there would be no killing in order to produce it. Innocent beings are generally slain for profit and rarely for any other reason. So because of this text in particular, the Lankavatara Sutra, is much clearer and much more unambiguous than the earlier rules. And because of that, vegetarianism is much more widespread amongst Buddhists in places like China, Taiwan, Korea, than is the case in Southeast Asia that follow the earlier scriptures. So then I want to talk a little bit about the climate crisis. And I think a perspective in Buddhism that can be useful, not just to Buddhists, but I think hopefully more broadly, is the idea of interdependence, which is the kind of more general perspective that this idea of action and consequence comes from. Just as in terms of ethics, every action has a consequence. In Buddhism, the description of the way that reality functions is based on the idea of cause and effect. That things don't happen randomly, that everything arises on the basis of causes and conditions. And that also means that we as people, as individuals, are fundamentally connected to the rest of the universe. We usually think of ourselves almost as like bubbles moving around in the world, interacting with other things. We see ourselves as these kind of discrete objects, but in fact, we're completely interdependent with our environment. You know, we're completely dependent on air, water, food, the societies we live in, the cultures, the economic systems. We can't exist independently from our environment, but we don't often think in those terms. We don't often see ourselves in those terms. But rather than kind of bubbles moving around in the world, I think a better metaphor is we're like nodes of connection. We're nodes where, if you think of a network of wires or strings that come together at certain points, what we think of ourselves as me is actually just the nexus of a whole network of different relationships, relationships to our environment, to our society, our personal relationships. And if you remove all those relationships, then there's nothing left. There's no core. And so this way of looking at human beings as fundamentally part of the universe, part of nature, connected to nature, I think is something that can be an antidote to the kind of thinking that's led us to the climate crisis that we're in. Buddhism's fundamentally a training in facing reality the way it actually is, with the filters of how we would like it to be removed. And I think that's much of what's missing in terms of the attitudes and the perspectives that have led us to the climate crisis we're in now. So I think Buddhism has something to contribute in terms of the perspectives of loving kindness and non-violence, and also the idea of interconnectedness. So I just wanted to mention briefly, I've written a bit, if you want to read more about vegetarianism and Buddhism, I have some information on my website, and I have the translation of the part of the Lankavatara Sutra that talks about meat eating in Buddhism. I also wanted to mention just a couple of other websites. There's within the Extinction Rebellion movement, there is a kind of Buddhist subgroup who are engaged very much in direct action to counter the climate crisis. So they do a lot of very admirable work. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to have a look at their website. And there's also this great resource, shabkar.org, named after a famous Tibetan Buddhist vegetarian teacher, which has lots of information and resources about vegetarianism and Buddhism. So I'm not quite sure how I'm doing for time. Have I gone over my 20 minutes, or am I okay? Anyway, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions. Or
yeah, thank you so much. Very, very interesting. And you can hear me now, yes?
Yes.
So I ask the panelists if you have some kind of follow-up or reaction to this interesting presentation. Paula, Zehra, Philip, Marie.
I'll just say that I thought it was really interesting. That was very enlightening. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
I think also it was very interesting. I have a question. I think this notion of action and consequence, cause and effect, and interdependence sounds great. And if you would practice it, you would really not, we wouldn't have been in the situation we are now. But my question is, in order to understand the consequences, you have to be very knowledgeable. I mean, most people, even educated people, they don't realize that if they do something, it will cause harm. So how is that seen upon?
I suppose Buddhists would see it in what you might call quite psychological terms. So that there are some basic guidelines in Buddhism in terms of what kinds of actions have positive consequences and what kinds have negative consequences. So, you know, there are what we call 5 precepts, 5 kind of training principles that you find in all forms of Buddhism, that Buddhists try and act on the basis of loving kindness, of generosity, of contentment, truthfulness, and mental clarity or mindfulness. But yes, it's difficult. I mean, Buddhism is not it's not a set of rules to be followed. It's a training to be engaged in, and it's progressive. So, you know, Buddhists would rely on the teachings of the Buddha and of other Buddhist teachers because we believe that they see things more clearly than we do, and we're prepared to take their advice. But Buddhism also involves developing, you know, your own mental clarity and trying to see things more clearly. So that, I mean, that's where meditation comes in, and there's a whole, you know, system of training which basically constitutes Buddhism.
Okay, thank you so much, Philip.
I was thinking that there might be a parallel here, and the example that occurred to me in Leviticus 25 and Deuteronomy 11 of the Older Testament, the scriptures which we share with Christians and Judaism share. There is a promise that if if a community lives within the covenant of God, then as it were, the earth will cooperate with us, that crops will grow, the rain will fall, the land will be fertile, animals will thrive, and so on. If we don't do that, then the consequence will be the opposite. And I think that there's a clear implication of that, illustration of that in the situation we now find ourselves in, that we haven't lived within the covenant of God. We have treated animals abysmally cruelly. We have poisoned the land and the sea. We have been indifferent towards God's creation, and the consequence of that is what we now see. And this is set out for us in terms of action and consequences, as has just been outlined in the covenant, in the Mosaic covenant.
Okay.
I think I just point out that the difference in Buddhism is that the action and consequence is seen as being completely natural. So it's seen in the same terms as, you know, the law of gravity. Just as Newton observed and described the law of gravity, Buddhists would see the Buddha as observing and describing the way the universe works. But those processes are completely natural and impersonal. There's no divine intervention or Buddhic intervention or control over those processes. The Buddha simply describes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That would be a distinction, and that within the Judeo-Christian tradition, everything from consequences of our treatment of animals through the Newtonian laws of gravity would be rooted within the will of God. Yes, that's true.
Okay, so thank you so much, Śraddhāpa. And now we go to the fifth world religion, Hinduism. And Marie Mandakini Spennare will hold this very interesting presentation.
Yes, and you see the presentation now in a good shape, or? Yes, thank you very much for the help. Yeah, Namaskar. My intention for today's introduction, as it is a short introduction, is to give some easy glimpses on Hindu ethos and some perspectives on lifestyle. I call it Hinduism, Vegetarianism, Vegan, and Mother Cow, because it was about veganism a lot. And here you see the Kamadeno, the mother cow that we care so much about in Hinduism, and they are placed in Goshalas, a cow shelter, because we have to take care of her. And she is in herself essence of agriculture. Next picture, please. Yeah, here are some verses from different holy scriptures to understand how basic the knowledge of farming, food production and eating, and even sustainability are listed in body, mind, surroundings, and religious life of a Hindu. Do food affect the mind? I present here three different verses from our scriptures. First from Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. The spiritually minded who eat food that is first offered in sacrifice are released from all kinds of sin. Others who cook food for their own enjoyment verily eat only sin. The second is from the Yogi's diet, Mitahara, Purse of Wisdom. Agreeable and sweet food, leaving 1/4 of the stomachs free, and eaten as an offering to Lord Shiva, is Mitara, yogic eating. We have also to save a half body and not overfill. And we can share our hands, put our hands together. You can see how much you should eat every time. You should not overeat. The third is from Srimad Bhagavatam, first chapter 17:3. Milking cow means drawing the principles of religion in a liquid form. The liquid is the essence. Next picture, please. And here she is again the goddess. The meaning is that the cow in herself, she is carrying all the gods inside her body as their home. And here is her little calf licking. And even all the gods, she's herself a goddess, and she even keeps some words in her body. Next picture. No, one back, sorry. We're calling her the Gaumata, the cow. In Swedish, cow, and it's the same long-time root from Sanskrit language. The mother, our mother and mother of everything, as her body is the home. So don't eat her, don't kill her, don't hurt her. Now is next. Here's some rules. We heard this from different speakers. One should never show disrespect for cows in any way, nor should one feel any repugnance towards the urine or dung of a cow, because these things are also pure. When cows are grazing or laying down, relaxing, one should never disturb or annoy them in any way. Cows should never be killed in any type of sacrifice, or slaughtered in any way for food, as the killing of cows constitutes the most heinous of all sins in existence. That's the way we look at the Gau Mata. Next. How many know this? This you have all heard about, ahimsa, the principle of non-violence. Mostly known from Gandhi, but it's long before Gandhi. It's the practice of non-violence and non-harming, and this is essential to yoga, to spiritual and religious practice. It's number one and the first of 5 yamas, the moral codes we have, also practiced in Jain and Buddhism. Don't kill, don't injure, don't harm. But it also applies to don't use violent language or speak violent words. Don't speak negatively to yourself or self-sabotage, or don't do self-destruction on your own personality. I will tell you the 5 yamas is first ahimsa, as I told you, non-harming, promoting love and compassion. As several others have spoken about this word. The second is satya, truthfulness, to being honest with yourself and others. The third is asteya, non-stealing, giving rather than taking. The fourth is brahmacharya, celibate or moderation, conserving your energy, don't waste. The fifth and last is aparagriha, non-attachment, to let things go, to live in a flow where you can be released from both things and emotions and things. This is yogic training also, and also meditation. Next. This is from a Swedish blog. We was talking about a little about environment also, not only taking care of animals. India is cited as an example by almost 500 million vegetarians. The average annual intake of meat in India is 5.3 kilo. It can be compared with 80 kilos per person in Sweden and 100 kilos per person in the USA. India is now emerging as a model country when it comes to sustainable eating. A number is 50% in India and 35% of them are Hindus. In Sweden are the amount around 10%, with both vegetarians and vegans. Next. Growth and animal welfare means human well-being and pleasure for gods. That's one lifestyle rule. Next. I have problems with this, it's a difficult word for me. Sustainability is also the need of personal responsibility, self-control, and a more caring lifestyle. That's what we think we all need, a more caring lifestyle. Several of us are speaking about this today also. Next. Gods with animal expressions, half man, half animal. Animals placed in front of gods, carriers, saviors, and helpers. Should we not be blessed from them and respect them also, if we respect ourselves? The future God, good or bad, of the climate and the environment are indisputably linked to coexistence and, again, compassion. You can see behind me I have Ganesha, half human, half animal. Many gods this way in Hinduism. Next. I also want to mention Ayurveda in Sanskrit, as has its origin in the word ayus, life, and Veda, science. Ayurveda originated in India more than 5,000 years ago, and it is the oldest continuously practiced healthcare system in the world. Ayurveda is built around the 5 elements of ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Ayurveda teaches that all illness has its roots in the area of stomach. Ayurveda teaches that all illness has roots and has the forms of 3 different types of persons, Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, both physically and mental, and that you can balance these parts in a person to make him or her more healthy. All the things are coming from vegetarian food also. All the medicine, especially ghee, is important. It's butter, clean butter. And we also have these many plants and trees, but especially also tulasi plant is for purification of environment. It says it keeps insects away, even wild animals. It can give you protection from. Next. And when I mention green things and trees and environment, we have Kalpa Vriksha, the Hindu tree of life. Almost every lesson is talking about this tree of life. Even the Vikings have this tree of life. And when you study a leaf or a tree, you can see that they have a respiratory system, and it seems very similar to our lungs and what is in our body as well. And everything in nature is breathing. It's the essence, the beginning, and the end. Om is the sound of creation in Hinduism. Without breathing, you are not on this earth. When they say that the Brahma, God of Brahma, is breathing, he's Om, and he is changing, he's giving birth to a new universe. Otherwise, he's sleeping and then he wakes up and he's Om is the sound you hear in the universe. New planetary systems are creating. So you understand the lines in a simple leaf and the fine threads of fragility. It's in our life and it's in nature as well. Close connection. Next. Then I want to talk about yoga a little also. We say no over, it's only half picture, but it doesn't matter. No overthinking, don't think too much. Let go mind. But think positive, create health and satisfaction and peace with fresh green food to avoid the opposite. The opposite is stress, illness, aggressions, all the way to start a war. So from basic to quality in lifestyle. We don't want to leave the comfort zone, and we are lazy and egocentric in our livings and our lifestyle. We don't want to leave, but we all know that there are a transformation. We have to do it. It must be done. So next, I want to mention a little about our organization, Hinduforum, and what we do now. We working close with communities and other organizations, as I told you earlier. We are making leadership on holding back COVID. We have done this for all this COVID time. And the temples, everything has, of course, been closed down. And we are setting up instead participation on net on yoga and participation and arranging. We have an organization called Healing Our Earth. It gives vegetarian programs and vegan programs. And we are taking part in arranging program on World Environment Day every year. We have a big seminar. And we have made a film program on water and faith with Sweden International Water Institute. They are doing films of our relation to, we don't talk much today about water, but water is very, very important, even in both rituals and in our own future. We are extending awareness on the Hindu Declaration of Climate Change, a global call to 900 million Hindus. Now we have the amount. Living worldwide, 900 millions. Living worldwide to lives in harmony and balance with the natural world. I also want to make very clear that Hinduism, unlike other maybe, do not have a super head or one scripture only that says what we should all think at the same time. No, it's not the fact. And we are also very open for new partners, both religious and secular, we want to cooperate with. And we always had these issues of vegan, vegetarian, and nature, environment, etc. on our agenda all the way from the start and also thousands of years ago. So it's nothing new for us, but we are positive to see bridge building between us and other religious and other groups. We are working a lot in interfaith community almost everywhere in the world. And we want to keep up things with the possibility to attract good values and good results. Next. Yeah, I will answer a question, and thanks for listening. And Om Shanti, keep the peace up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. We have one question for you, and that is about, because the big majority of Hindus actually live in India. India is really trying to increase its production of milk and cheese. And could you say something about eating milk and cheese when you are a Hindu?
Yeah, we are allowed to eat milk and cheese. Even God, we were talking before if Muhammad or Jesus was eating meat, but one of our gods like Krishna, he is eating butter. Butter is the blessing. The ghee, the purified butter is the blessing. So I don't see the problem in that. I also know I was visiting ISKCON this week. They are trying to set up a milk production to serve every altar, every deity in the temples with clean milk. So I see that the problem is not the way people think it is. The problem is how we do it, how we treat the cows. We have to rearrange the old thing. Cows must be out, maybe milk robots, maybe rebuild all the homes, the stables for goshalas. It must be development there. And maybe also the cows and cows shall not be separated as soon as it's done today. It should be differences, big opportunities.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have 5-10 minutes left, and I will let in. Now it's
Dr. Phillips wants something.
Yeah, yes. Now it's free for reactions. Philip.
Thank you. Yes, you can. I was just going to follow that up, Marie, that if we sometimes buy cheese from a non-slaughter herd, which is associated with a Hindu community in Britain. The way the herd is kept follows the lines you've just outlined. And once the cows are past milking age, they're simply put out to pasture, so on a pension, if you like. And that pension is paid for in the cost of the cheese, which makes it phenomenally expensive. And for us, it's something that we would buy maybe 2 or 3 times a year because it's very expensive. Wouldn't compliance with the kind of practices you've outlined mean that cheese and milk would be quite a luxury in India?
Yes, it could be like this, not only in India, also here. It's not like I always talk about my own experience. It's not like when we were small children, we should have milk all the time. Every meal in Sweden, we have milk, a lot of milk. It's not like that. It's not, maybe that is the link to go closer to veganism. It's not for daily use, or that's what I said. That's what I told you, that they are setting up for milk production for deities, for gods, only for altar. And that what is left can maybe be for people to have in special occasions. But it will not be that we will not have these products. Of course, there are vegans somewhere, everywhere, and some vegans also in India. But it's a choice of free will to not use this.
I think what Philip talks about is something general for all kind of production of cheese and milk, that it's a very, very low percentage in Europe, in Asia, in everywhere, because the industrial type of production is so dominating. Even in India, when they are now trying to scale up producing more cheese and milk. So the different thing for consumers is to know actually how are these animals treated. And for me, when I come to my own choice, I eat very little milk and cheese, just because almost all of it are produced in very hard conditions for the animals. And could the other of you say something about how, because all of you have been very clear that producing meat, it's a lot of suffering in that process for the animals, and you have giving scripture support for that position. How should we look at production of cheese and milk in the religions? Philip.
Thank you. Well, the emphasis of the Christian people that I study, who are largely pre-20th century, and who reject church tradition and try to found their views on scriptural texts, the position that they would take would not be so much to emphasize a diet as to emphasize what a number of speakers today have done, which is how the animal product is produced. So in the case of meat, we know it to be a very cruel industry, and that would be the key feature in not eating it. In the case of milk and dairy, similar principles would apply. We know that the milk and dairy industry, in the industrial industry in the West, but as you say, now being developed in India and China, that we know that it's hideously cruel. We know that cows are slaughtered long before their natural lifespan. We know that cows are separated from calves at birth. We know that male calves, in dairy calves, which are no good for the meat industry and obviously don't produce milk, are simply slaughtered. There would be no justification for, in my view, for consuming milk or cheese from those sources. However, if the milk or cheese comes from, as the example I gave earlier, a non-slaughter herd, which is associated with the Hindu community, then I would have no objection to that, and I could see no objection to that biblically, to eating the milk and eating the cheese and drinking the milk. But it would be very much once or twice a year, simply because of the expense.
Zehra.
Thank you. I think Paula had her hand up before I did, so I'm happy to wait until after. Thank you.
I think it was Śraddhāpa was the first.
Oh.
Okay. I mean, I would definitely, I would be coming from an animal rights perspective. which, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, this distinction between animal rights and animal welfare. And so to me, the other speakers seem to be coming from a more animal welfare perspective, which is the idea that human beings can keep and use animals for our own benefit as long as it doesn't harm them too much. Whereas an animal rights perspective would ascribe, fundamental rights to animals, that they should have the right to life, to their own bodies, to freedom, and that any use or exploitation of animals by human beings that's detrimental to the animals is not acceptable. So that's the position I would take. And from a Buddhist perspective, there were a few other things that I didn't mention because I thought, loving kindness and non-violence were the most important points. But in terms of those 5 ethical principles I mentioned, the first is non-violence, but the second is it's slightly clumsily phrased, but it's called taking the not given. So you could say not stealing, but it's actually more than that. It's not taking anything that's not freely given to you. So this would also, in my view, preclude Buddhists from using dairy products, because the cow produces milk for her young, and that milk does not belong to us; it belongs to the cow. And taking it is appropriating something from her body. And I think someone in the chat pointed out that it's something in cultures where we're used to consuming dairy products we don't really think about, but cows only produce milk for their young. They only produce milk if they have a calf.
No, you are wrong.
Well, sorry, you're very welcome to respond after I've finished. Cows need to give birth in order to produce milk. So I don't see any way around the ethical problems that are fundamental to the dairy industry. And I also think, this is a kind of discussion that anyone who's a vegan will be very familiar with, that anytime you discuss veganism with someone always knows, a farm down the road that always treats the animals perfectly and they only buy from non-industrial sources. But why go to all that trouble? Why not just buy vegan cheese? It's much cheaper. It's just a matter of taste preference. And once you get used to eating vegan cheese, it's just as good. So I'm a bit skeptical as to why you would go through all of this quite complex thing of setting up this non-slaughter herd and paying a huge amount for buying cheese 2 or 3 times a year. I think the arguments for just buying vegan products are much cheaper, much more accessible. That no animals have been exploited in their production. To me, the balance of the arguments weighs much more strongly on buying vegan products. For those of us who live in wealthy countries where we can go to a supermarket and choose to buy whatever we want, for people who are living in poverty and struggling to get enough to eat, then obviously they don't have the same luxury of choice that I do.
Thank you. And then it's Zehra, and that's where after that, Paula.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that the aspects that I speak to in terms of animal welfare are very much in context from 1400 years ago, when Prophet Muhammad was the example set for Muslims. Now, that was, as I explained in the presentation, a completely different time, a food desert, a desert, quite literally. And so it's very different context today. And so all the information that I presented very much speaks to animal rights, particularly for those of us that live in the developed countries or that are living in cities and suburbs. It's a whole different scenario if you're living in the jungle, and people are today. It's easy to forget that we're a really big world and not everyone's connected by the magic of the World Wide Web. And so there are still communities today that very much are living in food deserts. However, for the vast majority of us, I think, at least I would encourage us to really look at things from the animal rights perspective. And anytime we turn animals into food production widgets, there's going to be exploitation somewhere along that chain, right, of production. And when we're speaking about animal welfare, there's still the question of the environmental impact. And so I echo the sentiments that, it's just so much work and so much trouble when we have so many other wonderful options available to us, that I'm excited to see more and more people try and head into that direction instead. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Paula, and after that, Marie.
Except for the compassion for animals principle in Judaism, I see two other principles that are violated by keeping cows for dairy products. When we now know the consequences of keeping livestock with the emissions of carbon dioxide, we know that it's so detrimental. Only to keep livestock at these great numbers is dangerous to our planet. And then when you think about in Judaism, we have this principle of preserving life, which is called pikuach nefesh. If we add to the carbon dioxide, we endanger our life, and that therefore we are violating the rule of pikuach nefesh. Did you understand my reasoning? We are not preserving life, not for us and not for the planet, and not for other beings. The other rule which we are violating is to see that our fellow beings, talking about humans now, have sustenance. If we use 60%, which is now the case, for growing food for livestock, there is not enough land to grow, to support and to sustain the world inhabitants. And this is grossly wrong according to Judaism. You have to see to that the poor have food. So these two principles are violated. And if you don't, okay, in Judaism, you say that one who doesn't know that a fault is being done, you can excuse it. But we now know the consequences. Therefore, we cannot say we didn't know. We don't know. So this is what I had to say about Judaism and milk.
Yeah. Everybody is against Hinduism. Is that my conclusion I should make? Every religion are eating much more meat and talking against Hindus. Sorry to say. Of course I will put my other cheek as well, but of course it is good with a big variation in production. But this is a bit not speaking truly, because there are a lot of studies how to deal with cows and cow herding. There not everything, and how do you see about the farming industry, the farmers, the agriculture you are talking about? I want to, how do you see on that?
Yes, because before Sarah, Marie, each participant are explaining from the religion point of view. So no one has talked about Hinduism except you. So now it's Zehra.
Thank you. I was just going to say, Marie, that I know many really influential Hindu vegans. His name's escaping me right now. Salesh Rao, Dr. Salesh Rao being an incredible example for so many of us. I'm actually quite inspired by him, and I've learned so much from him. Him and his organization, they were just at COP26 with the cow in the room. They had this big floaty cow called Vida. They're doing incredible advocacy on behalf of cows and behalf of animals everywhere. So I don't think this is about religion, because as far as religion goes, I mean, I'm the first to criticize the Muslim majority countries for their treatment of animals, right? So this isn't about religion at all, or putting any religion down, or saying any of them are superior. Nothing like that. We're just simply speaking about or at least I'm just simply speaking about the welfare and the rights of the animals themselves, and just my concern that anytime we look at them as a way that they benefit us as people, as humans, we tend to take away their rights, or their sense of being. They're beings just like us, and so that's where I come from in my concern. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Can't hear you.
You're muted, Stefan.
Okay. So to add again that, as Paula said, from more than the animal perspective, we also have the greenhouse gas emissions coming from production of cheese and milk, which are substantial, especially methane and laughing gas. So yeah, Marie.
Yeah, once again, it's a lot of blame on the cows and the cow keeping, but it's also different. There are different research. We should study all kinds of research. And I of course, I appreciate that there are various to when you do shop and change and choose what you're going to eat, but it must be not a big lobby. It's my own choice and others' choices to take the stand. I asked about 20 Hindus because I know this was coming up. I asked them how do they look at this to be giving up vegetarianism and become vegans instead. It's a free choice, but I met no one who was interested to make this switch. No.
Okay, there is some difference here between the views, and that is we expected, and that's I think it's good also.
Yeah.
So now we have had a very interesting seminar, I think, and you have all of you, if you want to say one little piece as to finishing off, it could be 10 seconds or just a few words. Philip, do you feel ready for that?
Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. I've now succeeded. Yeah, the thing that has struck me is that the different religious perspectives have drawn a distinction between what I might call the highest teaching of the respective religions and the common practice of those religions among many adherents, what I suppose you might call folk or popular religion, civil religions. And I think that's both depressing in that many practitioners simply aren't following the highest principles of their religion. But it's also quite hopeful in that those religions do have highest principles, and through presumably their respective religious organizations can seek to promote them.
Zehra, you're next. If you want to add something as a way to finish off.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Excuse me. I'll just say that I think it's a beautiful thing to see the rise of veganism the world over. I think it's wonderful to see so many people from different religious backgrounds, non-religious backgrounds come together and agree on our values and principles in this regard. I also think that it's inspiring to see organizations like Vegoforum and other such organizations functioning all over the world. I think one of the most important quotes that I learned recently, it was this lovely woman who runs an organization in Canada called Animal Justice. And they've got a wonderful course called the Animal Justice Academy. They did incredible work to train activists. One of the first things they said was, we don't just need vegans, but we need vegan activists. We need people to exercise their voice and stand up for the victims. And I think that that's quite salient in terms of advice. And just the final thing I'll say is that we often speak about choice, and I'm all for choice in every capacity that we can afford. But I think that when there is a victim, there is little choice. I think it is our duty to center the victim and their voice. And that's where I would say maybe choice takes the back seat. That's it for me. Thank you so much for having me. And it was so great meeting everyone and learning from everyone.
Thank you, Zehra. And then we continue with Paula.
Thank you. I think religions have a big role to play in the spread of both ethical values concerning sustainability and also spreading knowledge. Here in the Western world, and the more where we have so much available education, we understand what is causing climate change and destruction of the planet and the species. Other parts of the world, religious leaders are authorities, and people listen to religious leaders. So it is an important source of information and education, and that it is connected to the religion's ethical values of how we live and how we should see to that we can continue to live. So we have an important role. And also, I think religious leaders all over have the role to make the connections and to show these connections to their followers so they can be strengthened in their thinking and their actions to do the right thing. And I'm very glad to have been in this panel and to meet you beautiful, good people. And let's hope that we all together can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the word to Marie again, and we finish with Śraddhāpa.
Yeah, I just want to tell you some are younger, some are older. When I was 15 years, I started, you have maybe read my presentation, there were no things like vegan. The difficulties we had as vegetarians was almost similar with vegans today. So that's a point to think about. We will see what happened in the future. And of course, we are all engaged in several ways on animal welfare. That's why we are all here today, I guess. That was the purpose of this meeting. So I'm not negative or angry, but I think you miss a lot of the purpose, the meaning of Hinduism as a sheltering animals, teaching from the cow and spreading it out to all animals. This caretaking, this compassion. So I will end here and thank you very much for sharing my day.
Thank you, Marie. And then it's Śraddhāpa to have a word.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to take part, and I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think the two things that strike me, the areas where we disagree are not really based on our different religions. I think the distinction is between a more animal rights perspective and a more animal welfare perspective. And in terms of this discussion, you know, I'm sure, I think I would have much more in common with, you know, a Muslim or a Christian talking from an animal rights perspective than a Buddhist talking from an animal welfare perspective. So that was very interesting. Like Sarah said, you know, it's very inspiring to see, you know, over the last decade or so, you know, veganism coming more and more into the mainstream and animal rights becoming more and more mainstream within all religions and within society in general. And I think what I found particularly inspiring today was, I think all of us have drawn out, you know, all of us have talked about our religious texts, our scriptures, and drawn out the elements within those scriptures that support an animal liberation point of view. And kind of maybe in an interfaith spirit, I can end by, I can't quote, but by referring to a Muslim author, Reza Aslan, who I'm very fond of, who talks about the way that we read scripture. And, you know, he talks about the fact that if you don't get your values from your scriptures, you read your values into your scriptures. So, you know, if you have a speciesist point of view, you will read your scriptures in that way, and you will find justification for speciesism in your scriptures. If you support animal liberation, you will read your scriptures in that way and find resources in your scriptures for that point of view. And I think what we've seen from everyone is that those resources exist in all religions for those who want to advocate for animal rights, for veganism. You know, there's an abundance of resources in all of our traditions that we can draw on, both to talk with the members of our own religious communities. And I think, you know, primarily for me as a Buddhist, I'm not really interested in criticizing other religious perspectives. You know, I have more than enough to do trying to persuade my fellow Buddhists. But also I think, you know, there are perspectives within all traditions that we can benefit from and draw on and be inspired by. So I really appreciate everyone's contributions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. It was excellent presentation. And I'm personally very content with this. And so I just want to say thank you for today. And you who have seen this live, you can also see it on YouTube very soon. And we also will try to maybe make one video of each presentation so you can use it freely. Because I think this kind of content is not easily found on the internet, so on YouTube. So thank you for today.